Terrence and Alicia Washington boarded their first-class flight to Atlanta, excited about their son's graduation. Suddenly, a flight attendant separated them, citing airline policy. Humiliated, they noticed white couples sitting together undisturbed. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. The captain is coming out." The pilot walked directly toward them, smiling broadly. "Mom and Dad," he called out. Before we dive into this powerful story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever experienced or witnessed discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. Now, let's uncover how this shocking moment on a plane changed airline policies forever. Dr. Terrence Washington carefully folded his crisp white dress shirt and placed it in the suitcase. After 27 years as a neurosurgeon at Chicago Memorial Hospital, he had developed a methodical precision that extended beyond the operating room. "Honey, did you pack Jamal's gift?" called Alicia from the bathroom, where she was organizing her toiletries. "It's right here." Terrence patted his carry-on bag where he had secured his grandfather's antique pocket watch in a velvet box. The timepiece had been passed down through 3 generations of Washington men, and tomorrow, at his graduation from Howard University, Jamal would become the 4th. Alicia Washington stepped into the bedroom, her natural confidence radiating as always. As one of Chicago's most respected defense attorneys, she had built her reputation on composure under pressure. 25 years of marriage to Terrence had created a partnership of equals, both professionally accomplished and deeply committed to each other and their son. "First-class tickets were the right call," Alicia said, checking their flight details on her phone. "After what happened last time?" Terrence's expression darkened. 3 years ago, on a flight to a medical conference in Boston, a flight attendant had repeatedly asked to see his boarding pass, assuming he had mistakenly entered the first-class cabin. Despite showing his ticket 4 times, the attendant continued checking on him throughout the flight, while ignoring the white passengers around him. I know, Terrence sighed. "I just hate that we have to spend extra money to be treated with basic dignity." "Consider it an investment in our peace of mind," Alicia replied, squeezing his shoulder. "Besides, this is Jamal's big day. Nothing should overshadow that." Their son had overcome numerous obstacles to reach this moment. As one of few black students in his high school's advanced programs, Jamal had endured subtle and not-so-subtle racism from teachers who seemed surprised by his intelligence and peers who suggested he was only there to fulfill diversity quotas. Despite it all, he had thrived, earning a full scholarship to Howard University, where he had flourished, becoming valedictorian of his class. "Can you believe our boy is graduating tomorrow?" Terrence's voice softened with pride. "With honors," Alicia added, beaming. "And then straight to flight school." Jamal's dream of becoming a commercial airline pilot had initially worried them. The aviation industry remained overwhelmingly white and male, with black pilots making up less than 3% of commercial aviators. But their son's determination had never wavered, and they had vowed to support his dreams, whatever barriers he might face. The next morning, they arrived at Chicago O'Hare 3 hours before their scheduled departure. Experience had taught them that extra time was necessary to navigate the additional, random, screenings that seemed anything but random. "Boarding passes and IDs, please," the ticket agent said as they approached the counter. Her eyes widened slightly as she processed their first-class tickets, a momentary reaction they had grown accustomed to recognizing. "Everything looks in order, Dr. and Mrs. Washington," she said, her professional demeanor quickly recovering. "You'll be boarding through gate C-12. Enjoy your flight to Atlanta." "That went well," Alicia whispered as they walked away. "Let's not celebrate yet," Terrence replied, adjusting his grip on his carry-on. "We still have security and boarding." The security line moved efficiently until it was Terrence's turn to pass through the scanner. The light remained green, indicating no issues, yet a TSA agent stepped forward. "Sir, I need you to step aside for additional screening," he said flatly. Alicia watched as her husband's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, a reaction only she would notice. They had discussed this scenario countless times: stay calm, comply, document details afterward. Making a scene would only escalate the situation and potentially lead to worse outcomes. Of course, Terrence replied with practiced neutrality, stepping to the side where another agent waited with a handheld scanner. As they continued toward their gate after the extended security check, Alicia linked her arm through her husband's. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "I kept thinking about what we always told Jamal," Terrence replied. "Document, don't escalate, pursue justice through proper channels later." Speaking of which, Alicia pulled out her phone and made quick notes about the incident, including the TSA agent's name, badge and the time. As an attorney, she knew the power of documentation. The first-class lounge provided a brief respite, a space where they could decompress before boarding. Terrence sipped his coffee while Alicia reviewed some case notes on her tablet, professional habits hard to break even when traveling. "Attention passengers," the announcement came over the speaker. "Delta Airlines Flight 3482 to Atlanta will begin boarding in 15 minutes. Ready?" Alicia asked, gathering her belongings. Terrence nodded, his earlier tension gradually giving way to excitement about seeing their son. "For Jamal, I'd endure 1,000 TSA screenings." They approached Gate C12 where a young gate agent named Tyler greeted them with genuine warmth, scanning their boarding passes without a second glance. "Enjoy your flight, Dr. and Mrs. Washington," he said. "Congratulations on your son's graduation." The simple acknowledgement of their occasion felt refreshing, a reminder that not every interaction would be tainted by prejudice. "Thank you," they replied in unison, the small kindness bolstering their spirits as they prepared to board. The jetway stretched before them, that liminal space between airport and aircraft where anticipation typically builds for the journey ahead. For Terrence and Alicia, however, it was a space where their guard remained vigilantly raised. "First-class passengers to the left, please," instructed a flight attendant stationed at the aircraft entrance. Her name tag read Brenda, and her smile seemed plastered on, not quite reaching her eyes as they approached. "Good morning," Alicia offered warmly, a small test she often employed to gauge responses. "Morning," Brenda replied curtly, her gaze already shifting to the passengers behind them. Terrence and Alicia exchanged a glance, a silent communication honed over decades of marriage. That small interaction had set the tone, and they both knew to stay alert. The first-class cabin was half full, primarily with business travelers typing furiously on laptops or scrolling through phones. A few looked up as the Washingtons entered, their expressions ranging from neutral to subtly surprised. One older white man in a navy suit actually did a double-take before returning to his newspaper. "2A and 2B, Terrence murmured, locating their seats by the window. As they settled in, Alicia noticed a white couple across the aisle being greeted effusively by another flight attendant, whose name tag identified her as Catherine. She was offering them pre-flight champagne and addressing them by name. The contrast with Brenda's cool reception was stark. "Would you like something to drink before takeoff?" Brenda had returned, addressing the question somewhere between them, her tone suggesting it was a required courtesy rather than genuine hospitality. "Water for me, please," Terrence replied. "The same," added Alicia. Brenda nodded and moved on without further acknowledgement. Meanwhile, across the aisle, Catherine was laughing at something the white businessman had said, her hand resting comfortably on the back of his seat. "Some things never change," Alicia whispered, removing her Kindle from her purse. "At least we're on the plane," Terrence responded, his voice equally low. "And in a few hours, we'll be watching our son graduate." The reminder of their purpose centered them both. This trip wasn't about the indignities they might face. It was about celebrating Jamal's achievement. They had taught him to focus on his goals while acknowledging the realities of being black in America, and they would practice what they preached. As other passengers continued boarding, Terrence recalled a conversation with Jamal during his first year at Howard. Their son had called, upset after being followed by security at a shopping mall near campus. "I did everything right, Dad," Jamal had said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Hands visible, receipt ready, direct eye contact. Still got stopped. "You did do everything right, son," Terrence had assured him. "The problem was never you." That evening, they had spent 2 hours on the phone, not just comforting Jamal but strategizing. Alicia had outlined how to file formal complaints, while Terrence emphasized the importance of mental self-preservation when navigating these waters. A commotion at the front of the cabin pulled Terrence from his memories. Catherine was speaking in hushed but intense tones with a younger male flight attendant whose name tag read, Carlos. Though trying to be discreet, their body language suggested disagreement, with Catherine repeatedly gesturing toward the passenger manifest in her hand. "Something's up," Alicia murmured, having also noticed the exchange. Carlos glanced in their direction, his expression difficult to read, before nodding reluctantly to whatever Catherine was saying. The younger flight attendant then disappeared into coach, while Catherine approached the cockpit door, knocking sharply. Moments later, boarding completed, and the cabin door was secured. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming passengers aboard Delta Flight 3482 to Atlanta, promising an on-time arrival despite some expected turbulence. As the safety demonstration began, Catherine moved through the cabin, her gaze repeatedly falling on the Washington seats. Terrence felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with anticipating confrontation, an involuntary physical response he had experienced too many times before. "Excuse me," Catherine was suddenly standing beside them, her voice artificially pleasant but her posture rigid. "There seems to be a seating issue I need to address." Several nearby passengers looked up, curiosity piqued. "Is there a problem?" Alicia asked calmly, though Terrence could hear the lawyer in her voice emerging, precise and prepared. "Well," Catherine glanced at her manifest, "our system shows that you and Mr. Washington weren't meant to be seated together." The statement hung in the air, so absurd that for a moment neither Terrence nor Alicia responded. "We purchased these tickets together," Terrence finally said, reaching for his phone where the confirmation email was saved. "We're traveling together to our son's graduation." Catherine's smile remained fixed. "I understand, but sometimes our seating algorithm separates parties for weight distribution purposes." Across the aisle, the white couple exchanged confused glances, clearly recognizing the implausibility of this explanation. "That's strange," the white businessman commented, just loudly enough to be heard. "My wife and I were assigned seats together without any issue." Catherine briefly lost her composure, shooting the man an irritated look before returning her attention to the Washingtons. "I'm simply following airline protocol," she insisted, her voice hardening. "Mr. Washington, I'll need you to move to seat 4F, please." Terrence felt dozens of eyes on him, the weight of public scrutiny he had endured countless times before. He looked around the cabin, noting at least 2 other couples seated together, all of them white. "Before I move," he said quietly, "I'd like to understand why the algorithm you mentioned doesn't seem to apply to any other couples on this flight." The cabin grew uncomfortably silent as passengers recognized the confrontation unfolding. Some pretended sudden interest in safety cards or magazines, while others watched openly, their expressions ranging from discomfort to curiosity to outright concern. "Sir," Catherine's voice dropped to a warning tone, "if you refuse to comply with crew member instructions, I'll need to involve the captain." The subtle threat was clear: comply or risk being removed from the flight entirely. With Jamal's graduation less than 24 hours away, they couldn't afford that risk. "Let me handle this," Alicia whispered to Terrence, then looked directly at Catherine. "We'll need to see the specific airline policy you're referring to, please." "I don't have to show you the policy," Catherine replied, her voice rising slightly. "As a flight attendant, my instructions regarding seating arrangements must be followed." The tension in the cabin was palpable now. A middle-aged white woman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while a young black woman 2 rows back was watching intently, her phone partially visible in her hand. "Actually," Alicia responded, her tone measured yet authoritative, Federal Aviation Regulations Part 121.586 states that airlines cannot discriminate based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry. What you're doing appears to be selective enforcement of a policy that doesn't exist. Terrence felt a surge of admiration for his wife. After 20 years as a defense attorney specializing in civil rights cases, she could cite regulations and precedents from memory. Catherine's face flushed. This has nothing to do with discrimination. It's about aircraft balance and safety. Then why, Terrence interjected, gesturing discreetly around the cabin, are all other couples seated together? Including those who boarded after us? Several passengers looked around, the disparity impossible to ignore. The white couple across the aisle exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Sir, I don't appreciate your tone," Catherine said, deflecting the question entirely. "If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to ask security to escort you off the aircraft." The threat hung in the air, heavy and familiar. Terrence felt himself transported back 5 years, to another flight where he'd questioned similar treatment and ended up missing an important medical conference because he'd been removed from the plane. The airline had later issued a half-hearted apology after his lawyer, Alicia, had filed a formal complaint, but the damage and humiliation had been done. "We are not being disruptive," Alicia stated firmly, removing her bar association card from her wallet. "We are calmly questioning what appears to be discriminatory treatment. As a civil rights attorney, I'm formally requesting the written policy you're attempting to enforce." Catherine's confidence wavered momentarily before she doubled down. "I need to speak with the captain about this disruption." She turned abruptly and marched toward the cockpit. In her absence, the cabin remained uncomfortably silent until the white businessman across the aisle leaned over. "This is ridiculous," he said quietly. "My wife and I checked in after you did. If there was some algorithm about seating, we would have been separated too." "Thank you," Terrence replied, genuinely appreciative of the acknowledgement. The young black woman from 2 rows back had moved into the empty seat directly behind them. "I'm recording this," she whispered. "Just FYI. I'm Zoe, by the way. This isn't right." Alicia nodded gratefully but kept her attention focused on the cockpit door where Catherine had disappeared. "Do you think we should move?" Terrence asked quietly, leaning close to his wife's ear. "For Jamal's sake, we can't miss this flight." The question transported Alicia back to a painful memory from Jamal's childhood. Their son, then only 12, had come home from school in tears after being accused of cheating on a math test. His score had been too high, his teacher had implied, for someone like him to achieve without dishonesty. Terrence had wanted to demand an immediate meeting with the principal, but Alicia had cautioned patience, suggesting they document everything and prepare a measured response. "We taught Jamal to stand up for himself with dignity," she whispered back. "We need to model that now." The cockpit door opened, and Catherine emerged with a triumphant expression, followed by a security officer whose badge identified him as Maxwell. "These are the passengers," Catherine said, pointing directly at the Washingtons. Officer Maxwell approached, his expression stern. "I understand there's a problem with following crew member instructions." Before either of the Washingtons could respond, the younger flight attendant Carlos stepped forward from the galley. "Actually," he said, his voice slightly shaky but determined, "there's been a misunderstanding. There is no airline policy about separating couples for weight distribution. I've worked here for 3 years and have never heard of such a thing." Catherine shot him a venomous look. "Carlos, this doesn't concern you." "It does if you're making up policies," he replied, standing his ground. "These passengers purchased their tickets together and were assigned these seats together. There's no legitimate reason to separate them." Officer Maxwell looked between the 2 flight attendants, confusion evident on his face. "So there's no actual policy being violated here?" he asked. "No," Carlos confirmed. "There isn't." The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers exchanged glances, some now openly disapproving of Catherine's behavior. The white businessman across the aisle had pulled out his own phone and appeared to be typing an email. "I need to see both of you in the galley," Officer Maxwell said to the flight attendants, his professional demeanor barely concealing his discomfort with the situation. As they stepped away, Alicia reached for Terrence's hand, squeezing it tightly. The humiliation of being singled out in front of a plane full of strangers was all too familiar, but the unexpected alliance from Carlos and the tacit support from fellow passengers felt like something new. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "we're facing it together. Just like we always have." Terrence nodded, his expression resolute. They had encountered discrimination in various forms throughout their lives and careers, the surprised looks when patients discovered their black doctor, the assumptions that Alicia was a paralegal rather than the lead attorney, the random security checks at airports. Each incident had been painful, but each had also strengthened their resolve to create a better world for Jamal. "Do you think they'll remove us from the flight?" Terrence asked quietly. "They can try," Alicia replied, her lawyer's mind already formulating the lawsuit that would follow. "But they'll regret it if they do." As Officer Maxwell conferred with the flight attendants in the galley, the atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly tense. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some pretending to be absorbed in magazines or devices while stealing curious peeks at the unfolding drama. Others watched openly, their expressions ranging from discomfort to outright support for the Washingtons. Alicia's legal training kicked in fully now. She knew that documentation would be crucial, so she discreetly opened the Notes app on her phone, recording the time, date, and names of the flight attendants involved. "What's happening is textbook discrimination," she whispered to Terrence. "And we have witnesses." Zoe, the young black woman who had moved to sit behind them, leaned forward. "I've been live streaming since Catherine first approached you," she confided. "Already got 3,000 viewers and climbing. People are outraged." The news that their humiliation was being broadcast to thousands should have been another layer of discomfort, but instead, Terrence felt a strange sense of validation. For once, the discrimination they faced wouldn't be dismissed as oversensitivity or misunderstanding. There was visible, public evidence. Officer Maxwell returned from the galley, his expression now professionally neutral, though a slight furrow in his brow betrayed his discomfort with the situation. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington," he began formally, "I apologize for the confusion. There appears to be a misunderstanding about seating policies." Catherine stood behind him, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. Carlos hovered nearby, looking both nervous and determined. "A misunderstanding?" Alicia echoed, her tone making it clear she recognized the attempted minimization. "Officer Maxwell, what we experienced was selective enforcement targeting us as the only black couple in first class. That's not a misunderstanding, it's discrimination." Her clear articulation of the issue caused several passengers to nod in agreement. The white businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. "I can confirm that my wife and I were never asked to change our seating arrangement," he offered. "And we checked in after the Washingtons." A murmur of support rippled through the cabin as other passengers began to speak up. "The couple in 5A and 5B weren't separated either," called someone from the back. "I've flown this airline weekly for 10 years and never heard of this policy," added another passenger. Catherine's face flushed with anger. "This is becoming disruptive. We need to prepare for takeoff." "What's disruptive?" Terrence stated firmly, finding his voice, "is the public humiliation of paying customers based on the color of their skin." Officer Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. As a security professional, he was trained to handle unruly passengers, not to mediate civil rights disputes. Moreover, the growing consensus among passengers was clearly in favor of the Washingtons. "Perhaps," he suggested carefully, "the simplest solution is for Dr. and Mrs. Washington to remain in their assigned seats as ticketed." Catherine stepped forward, her composure slipping. "That's not your decision to make. As the senior flight attendant." As the senior flight attendant interrupted a new voice from the front of the cabin, "You are expected to treat all passengers with respect and dignity." All heads turned to see an older black flight attendant who had just emerged from the cockpit area. Her name tag read Diana, and the 4 stripes on her uniform indicated her senior status. "Diana," Catherine began, but was cut off again. "I've been informed of the situation," Diana stated firmly. "And I've also been informed that the captain wishes to address this personally." The announcement sent a fresh wave of tension through the cabin. Captains rarely involved themselves in passenger disputes unless they were considering removing someone from the flight. Terrence felt his heart sink. After everything, would they still miss Jamal's graduation? He thought about his son receiving his diploma, looking out into the audience for the parents who had sacrificed so much to get him there, only to find empty seats. Alicia must have sensed his thoughts because she reached for his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as they always had. The PA system crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay in our departure. I've been made aware of a situation in the cabin that requires my personal attention. I'll be coming out momentarily to address it." The announcement prompted a flurry of whispers among passengers. The captain leaving the cockpit to handle a dispute was highly unusual. "What do you think will happen?" Terrence asked quietly. "I don't know," Alicia admitted. "But I'm prepared to fight this all the way to federal court if necessary." Have you ever witnessed discrimination that made your blood boil? Comment number 1 if you believe standing up against injustice is always worth it, even when it's uncomfortable. Hit that like button if you admire the courage it takes to maintain dignity in the face of humiliation. And subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and triumph over prejudice. What would you do if you were in the Washington's position? Would you comply to avoid missing your son's graduation, or stand your ground against blatant discrimination? The choice between dignity and practicality is one many face daily. As we continue this true story, you'll see how a shocking twist changed everything. The cockpit door opened, and a hush fell over the cabin. Every eye turned to watch as the captain emerged, his tall figure commanding immediate respect in his crisp uniform with 4 gold stripes on each shoulder. He was a black man in his early 50s, with closely cropped salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Catherine's expression flickered between surprise and apprehension as the captain approached. Diana, the senior flight attendant, stood aside respectfully. "I'm Captain Michael Harris," he introduced himself to the cabin at large, his deep voice carrying easily without being raised. "I apologize for our delayed departure. It seems we have a situation that requires clarification." He turned to Officer Maxwell first. "Thank you for your assistance. I'll handle things from here." Maxwell nodded, clearly relieved to be removed from the center of the conflict. He retreated toward the galley, maintaining a professional presence but no longer actively involved. Captain Harris then faced Catherine directly. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding about our seating policies." Catherine straightened her posture defensively. "I was enforcing standard procedures for cabin balance, Captain." "Interesting," Captain Harris replied, his tone neutral but his expression skeptical. "In my 23 years with this airline, I've never heard of separating passengers who book together for cabin balance, when the flight isn't even full." A few passengers nodded in agreement, and someone toward the back of first class murmured, "Exactly." Catherine's face flushed. "I was simply trying to, Ms. Reynolds," Captain Harris interrupted firmly, "we'll discuss this further after the flight. For now, please prepare the cabin for departure once I've resolved this matter." Dismissed, Catherine retreated to the galley, her body language radiating tension and displeasure. Captain Harris then turned to face the Washingtons, and something remarkable happened. His professional demeanor softened, and a warm smile spread across his face. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington," he said, his voice now colored with genuine pleasure. "I thought those names looked familiar on the manifest." Terrence and Alicia exchanged confused glances. They had never met this man before, yet he was addressing them with the familiarity of an old friend. The captain must have read their confusion because he chuckled softly. "You don't recognize me, do you? I suppose there's no reason you would. But I've heard so much about you from Jamal that I feel like I know you already." At the mention of their son's name, Alicia gasped. "You know Jamal? Know him?" Captain Harris's smile widened with pride. "I've been mentoring him for the past 2 years. I'm the one who recommended him for the airline's pilot development program." The revelation landed like a thunderclap in the quiet cabin. Passengers who had been following the drama now watched with renewed interest as this unexpected connection unfolded. "Jamal never mentioned." Terrence began, trailing off in astonishment. "He wanted it to be a surprise," Captain Harris explained. "He told me you were flying out for his graduation, but I had no idea you'd be on my flight until I reviewed the manifest this morning. I was planning to introduce myself properly once we were airborne." Terrence remembered now, Jamal had mentioned a mentor, a veteran pilot who had taken an interest in his career. But he had never shared the man's name, always referring to him simply as, "my mentor," or Captain M. "So all this time," Alicia said, connecting the dots, when Jamal talked about the pilot who was helping him navigate the industry. "That was me," Captain Harris confirmed. "Your son is one of the most promising students I've ever mentored. His dedication reminds me of myself at his age, trying to break into an industry that wasn't always welcoming to people who look like us." The poignancy of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the cabin. Here were the Washingtons, subjected to discrimination minutes earlier, now being addressed with respect and admiration by the highest authority on the aircraft, a black pilot who had surely faced his own battles in the aviation industry. Zoe, still recording from her seat behind them, whispered, "This is incredible. The comments on the live stream are going crazy." Catherine had reappeared from the galley, watching the scene unfold with visible discomfort. The sight of Captain Harris treating the Washingtons like valued friends rather than troublesome passengers clearly contradicted the narrative she had constructed. Carlos approached cautiously. "Captain, we're now 20 minutes delayed. Dispatch is asking for an update." Captain Harris nodded acknowledgement but didn't rush. He turned back to the Washingtons. "I want to personally apologize for how you were treated today. This is not what our airline stands for, and I assure you it will be addressed appropriately." He then addressed the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We'll be pushing back from the gate momentarily. And Dr. and Mrs. Washington will absolutely remain in their assigned seats together, as they should have from the beginning." A spontaneous round of applause broke out among several passengers, further highlighting the communal recognition of the injustice that had nearly occurred. Captain Harris smiled at the Washingtons once more. "I look forward to catching up properly once we're in the air. Jamal speaks so highly of you both, and now I can see why. He has your courage." As he turned to return to the cockpit, Alicia called after him. "Captain Harris?" He paused, looking back. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of gratitude not just for this moment, but for his mentorship of their son. "No need for thanks," he replied warmly. "As I always tell Jamal, we rise by lifting others." As Captain Harris disappeared back into the cockpit, the energy in the cabin had transformed completely. What had begun as a scene of discrimination and tension had become something unexpectedly affirming. Passengers who had been uncomfortable spectators now smiled at the Washingtons, some offering nods of support or quiet words of encouragement. Diana approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "With the captain's compliments," she said, placing them carefully on their tray tables. "And my personal apology for what you experienced today." "Thank you," Terrence replied, still processing the remarkable turn of events. As the plane finally began its pushback from the gate, Alicia leaned close to her husband's ear. "Of all the flights, on all the airlines, in all the world," she whispered, "we walked onto this one. Terrence squeezed her hand, his eyes suspiciously moist. Maybe the universe occasionally balances its accounts. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, its powerful engines humming with potential energy, much like the story that was still unfolding within its cabin. A story that had begun with the familiar pain of discrimination but was now veering into unexpected territory of connection and vindication. As the plane reached cruising altitude, a palpable shift had occurred in the first-class cabin. Passengers who had earlier avoided eye contact with the Washingtons now sought opportunities to engage them in conversation. The white businessman across the aisle, who had introduced himself as Bradford Mills, a corporate attorney from Boston, leaned over during the beverage service. "Dr. Washington, Mrs. Washington," he said, his tone respectful, "I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner. What happened was clearly wrong." "Thank you for eventually adding your voice," Alicia replied graciously. "It makes a difference when others acknowledge what's happening." "I should know better," Bradford admitted. "My firm handles employment discrimination cases, though mostly gender-based. Seeing it happen in real time, it's different from reading case files." This candid acknowledgement sparked a thoughtful conversation about the bystander effect and the responsibility of witnesses to injustice. Several nearby passengers joined in, creating an impromptu discussion that bridged seats and, more significantly, experiences. Meanwhile, Catherine had made herself scarce, working exclusively in the economy section. Carlos, however, provided attentive service to the first-class cabin, his earlier act of speaking truth to power having earned him visible respect from the passengers. "The captain would like to speak with you when it's convenient," Carlos informed the Washingtons quietly as he collected their empty glasses. "He suggested after the meal service, if that works for you." Terrence nodded. "We'd like that very much." As promised, once the meal trays had been cleared, Captain Harris emerged from the cockpit, leaving his co-pilot in command. He moved to the empty seat across from the Washingtons, his presence commanding yet approachable. First, he began, his voice low enough to provide some privacy, "I want to formally apologize again for what happened. I've been with this airline for over 2 decades, and that kind of behavior violates everything we stand for." "We appreciate that, Captain," Terrence replied. "But we're more interested in hearing about your connection with our son." Captain Harris's face brightened. "Jamal is extraordinary. I met him at a National Black Pilots Association event 2 years ago. He approached me afterward with such well-informed questions that I knew immediately he was serious about flying." "That sounds like our son," Alicia smiled. "Once he sets his mind to something." "Exactly," Captain Harris nodded. "When he told me about the obstacles he'd already overcome, being one of few black students in his high school's advanced programs, pushing back against a guidance counselor who suggested aviation was unrealistic, I recognized his determination. It reminded me of my own journey." He went on to explain how he had started mentoring Jamal informally at first, offering advice about flight schools and simulator time. Eventually, he had recommended Jamal for the airline's competitive pilot development program, which would fast-track him after graduation. "He didn't tell us about the development program," Terrence said, surprised. "That's Jamal," Captain Harris chuckled. "He wanted to make sure he got accepted on merit alone before sharing the news. The acceptance letter should arrive next week, but..." He winked, "You didn't hear that from me." Alicia felt tears threatening. After years of fighting for their son to be recognized for his brilliance rather than judged by his skin color, this validation from a respected pilot, a black man who had navigated the same treacherous waters, meant everything. "Thank you for believing in him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The thanks go to you," Captain Harris countered. "You raised a young man with not just intelligence, but integrity and resilience. In this industry, in this world, those qualities matter as much as technical skill." He shared stories about Jamal's progress, his questions, his insights. With each anecdote, the Washingtons gained new glimpses of their son's journey, seeing him through the eyes of a mentor who recognized his potential. "May I ask," Terrence ventured after a while, about your own path. Jamal mentioned you were one of the first black captains at this airline. Captain Harris nodded, his expression momentarily sobering. It wasn't easy. When I started in the early 90s, I was often the only black pilot in the room. Sometimes passengers would see me in the cockpit during boarding and request to be moved to another flight. That's awful, Alicia said, though not entirely surprised. It was what it was, he replied philosophically. But things are changing, slowly. When I started, less than 2% of commercial pilots were black. It's still under 3% today, but programs like the one Jamal is entering are trying to change that. He explained how he had made it his personal mission to mentor young black pilots, creating a network of support that he wished had existed when he was coming up through the ranks. That's why what happened today matters, he continued, his voice taking on a serious tone. It's not just about two passengers being mistreated. It's about the pattern it represents, the barriers that still exist. Zoe, who had been discreetly listening from her seat behind them, leaned forward. Captain, I hope you don't mind, but the live stream is still going, and people are asking if you'd share more about that perspective. Captain Harris considered this for a moment, then nodded. I don't mind, as long as it's clear I'm speaking as an individual, not as a representative of the airline. With that understanding established, he spoke candidly about the challenges faced by black professionals in aviation and beyond, the constant need to be twice as good to be considered half as qualified, the exhaustion of navigating microaggressions, the psychological toll of being perpetually viewed as other. But, he concluded on a note of cautious optimism, I wouldn't still be doing this if I didn't believe change was possible. Every young person like Jamal who breaks through brings others along. Every ally who speaks up, he nodded to Carlos, who was passing by with the beverage cart, shifts the culture a little more. As their conversation wound down, Captain Harris checked his watch. I should get back to the flight deck. We'll be beginning our descent in about 40 minutes. Before leaving, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his business card. Please, stay in touch beyond today. I'd like to continue our connection. We will, Terrence promised, taking the card. And we hope you'll join us for dinner while we're all in Atlanta. Jamal would be thrilled. I'd be honored, Captain Harris replied, standing to return to the cockpit. As he walked away, Alicia turned to Terrence, her expression reflective. When we boarded this flight, I never imagined. I know, he agreed. It's like the universe decided we'd had enough tests for one day and sent us a gift instead. Zoe, ending her live stream, leaned forward once more. Just so you know, your story has over 50,000 views now. People are calling the airline's customer service line and demanding action about what happened. The power of visibility in the digital age, what might have been a private humiliation dismissed or minimized in the past had become public testimony, witnessed and judged by thousands. Carlos approached with fresh drinks. The airline's VP of Customer Experience has been notified about the incident, he informed them quietly. Diana received a call in the galley. They're taking this very seriously. The swift response was heartening, though both Terrence and Alicia knew well the difference between institutional reaction and genuine change. Still, as the plane began its gradual descent toward Atlanta, they felt a sense of rightness settling over them. Not just because justice seemed to be unfolding, but because they had discovered an unexpected ally in their son's journey. We taught Jamal to find his people, Alicia murmured, the ones who would see his worth and help him grow. And he did exactly that, Terrence replied, thinking of Captain Harris with profound gratitude. Better than we could have imagined. The plane's descent into Atlanta brought a flurry of activity in the cabin. As passengers prepared for landing, putting away tray tables and returning seats to their upright positions, a different kind of preparation was taking place in the galley. Diana, the senior flight attendant, approached the Washingtons with a tablet in hand. Dr. and Mrs. Washington, I've been asked to inform you that Mr. Elliot Davidson, our airline's Executive Vice President of Customer Experience, would like to speak with you upon landing. That was fast, Terrence remarked, surprised by the swift escalation to executive level. Diana's expression was a mixture of professional composure and personal satisfaction. Your situation has received significant attention. Mr. Davidson is already at the airport, waiting to meet you personally. Alicia exchanged a glance with her husband. As an attorney, she recognized the airline's attempt at damage control, but also the opportunity it presented for meaningful accountability. We appreciate that, she replied carefully. We'd be happy to speak with him. As Diana moved away, Zoe leaned forward again. The live stream has over 100,000 views now. It's been picked up by several major social media accounts focusing on racial justice issues. I'm not sure how I feel about becoming a viral moment, Terrence admitted, his voice low. Our focus was just getting to Jamal's graduation without incident. Sometimes the moment chooses you, Zoe responded philosophically. For what it's worth, the comments are overwhelmingly supportive. People are outraged on your behalf, but also inspired by how you handled it. The plane touched down smoothly on Atlanta's runway, taxiing toward the terminal as passengers readied themselves for disembarkation. Catherine remained conspicuously absent from the first-class cabin, while Carlos and Diana handled the arrival announcements and preparations. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Harris's voice came over the intercom, welcome to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Local time is 2:17 p.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 76 degrees. On behalf of our entire crew, I want to thank you for flying with us today. There was a brief pause before he continued, his tone shifting subtly. I also want to take a moment to address the incident that occurred prior to our departure. Delta Airlines is committed to creating an inclusive environment where all passengers are treated with dignity and respect. What some of you witnessed today fell short of that commitment, and for that, I sincerely apologize. Steps are already being taken to address this situation at the highest levels of our organization. The cabin remained quiet as his words registered. Several passengers nodded in approval at the public acknowledgement. For those directly affected, Captain Harris concluded, please know that your grace under difficult circumstances has not gone unnoticed. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is maintaining your dignity while insisting on accountability. Thank you for that lesson today. As the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began retrieving their belongings, Bradford Mills, the attorney from across the aisle, handed Terrence his business card. If you need a witness statement for any reason, please don't hesitate to contact me, he offered. What happened wasn't right, and I'd be happy to go on record about what I observed. Several other passengers made similar offers, creating an impromptu community of support that had formed in the shared cabin space over the past few hours. When the door was opened, Diana appeared at the Washington side. If you wouldn't mind remaining seated until other passengers have deplaned, Mr. Davidson would like to speak with you here, for privacy. They agreed, watching as the cabin gradually emptied. Zoe gave them a thumbs up as she left, mouthing, I'll send you the video, after having exchanged contact information earlier. Once the last passenger had departed, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and an impeccable suit entered the cabin. Behind him came Captain Harris, having completed his post-flight duties in the cockpit. Dr. and Mrs. Washington, the man said, approaching with an extended hand. I'm Elliot Davidson, Executive VP of Customer Experience. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. His handshake was firm, his expression grave. First, let me offer my personal and professional apology for what you experienced today. It was unacceptable and contrary to everything our airline stands for. Alicia, in full attorney mode, responded carefully. We appreciate the acknowledgement, Mr. Davidson. However, we're concerned that what happened reflects systemic issues rather than an isolated incident. Davidson nodded, not defensive but receptive. I believe you're right, and that's precisely why I'm here. Captain Harris has briefed me on the situation, and I've reviewed some of the social media content that's circulating. He gestured to the empty seats across from them, a silent request for permission to sit. When they nodded, he continued. I'd like to hear directly from you about your experience, if you're willing to share it. Not to question or verify. We have ample evidence of what occurred, but because listening to those who've been wronged is the first step toward meaningful change. What followed was a candid conversation about not just the incident itself, but the broader context of racial discrimination in travel and public spaces. Terrence shared previous experiences of being profiled at airports and on flights, while Alicia outlined the legal and psychological aspects of such treatment. Davidson listened attentively, occasionally asking thoughtful questions but mostly absorbing their perspective. Captain Harris contributed his own insights about diversity challenges in the aviation industry. Here's what I propose, Davidson finally said. Beyond the obvious step of disciplinary action for the flight attendant involved, which is already in progress, I want to invite you both to participate in our revised crew training program on diversity and inclusion. He explained that the airline had been developing new training protocols, but this incident highlighted the urgent need for implementation and the value of including perspectives from those who had experienced discrimination firsthand. Your professional backgrounds in medicine and law, combined with your personal experience, would make you invaluable contributors to shaping how we train our staff, he concluded. Terrence and Alicia exchanged a look, their years of partnership allowing for silent communication. This was an unexpected opportunity to create systemic change rather than just individual accountability. We'd need to review the details, Alicia said cautiously, but we're open to the possibility. Our primary concern is ensuring that what happened to us doesn't happen to others. That's my concern as well, Davidson assured them. Additionally, while I know no compensation can truly address the humiliation you experienced, the airline would like to offer you lifetime premium status and travel vouchers as a tangible acknowledgement of our failure today. That's generous, Terrence acknowledged, but perhaps those resources could be directed towards scholarships for underrepresented students interested in aviation instead. In honor of Captain Harris's mentorship program. Davidson appeared genuinely moved by this suggestion. That's remarkably gracious. We can absolutely do that, while still ensuring you never experience this kind of treatment on our airline again. Captain Harris, who had been relatively quiet during this exchange, smiled with evident pride. I told you they reminded me of myself, he said to Davidson. Always thinking about the bigger picture. As their conversation concluded, Davidson assured them that Catherine had been removed from service pending a full investigation, and that Carlos would be recognized for his courage in speaking up. One last thing, Davidson added, reaching into his briefcase. I understand you're here for your son's graduation from Howard. When they confirmed this, he handed them an envelope. Captain Harris mentioned that your son Jamal has been accepted to our pilot development program. This was going to be sent next week, but I thought you might want to give it to him personally at his graduation. Inside was the official acceptance letter, along with details about the prestigious program that would set Jamal on an accelerated path to becoming a commercial airline pilot. Now he can announce it himself, as he wanted, Terrence said, emotion evident in his voice. As they finally prepared to leave the aircraft, Captain Harris walked them to the door. Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms, he observed. Today started with discrimination but is ending with opportunity, not just for Jamal, but for all the young people who will benefit from those scholarships, and all the passengers who will be treated better because of the training you'll help shape. Alicia nodded thoughtfully. As I often tell my clients, justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating conditions where the wrong couldn't happen again. Exactly, Captain Harris agreed. And that's the work that never ends. They exited the jetway into the bright Atlanta terminal, moving forward not just toward Jamal's graduation, but toward a future they were now actively helping to shape, one where the next generation might find fewer barriers and more allies along their journey. The Atlanta airport hummed with activity as Terrence and Alicia made their way from the gate toward baggage claim. Their unexpected meeting with Mr. Davidson had delayed their departure from the aircraft, but neither regretted the time spent laying groundwork for systemic change. I still can't believe we met Jamal's mentor by complete chance, Terrence said, adjusting his carry-on bag on his shoulder. What are the odds? Some might call it fate, Alicia replied with a smile. Though as your scientifically minded wife, I'll settle for a remarkable coincidence. As they rode the escalator down to the main concourse, Alicia's phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Zoe, containing a link to the live stream recording and her contact information. The video has 300,000 views now, Alicia noted, showing Terrence the screen. People are calling it "Flying While Black, Justice in the Sky." Terrence shook his head, still processing their newfound viral status. I hope this leads to real conversation, not just momentary outrage. That's partly up to us, Alicia reminded him. Davidson's offer to involve us in their training program could have meaningful impact. They paused at a coffee shop, deciding to regroup before continuing to baggage claim. As they settled at a small table with their drinks, Terrence's phone rang. It was Jamal. Dad, his voice came through urgently when Terrence answered. Are you and Mom okay? Your flight is all over social media. We're fine, son, Terrence assured him, putting the call on speaker so Alicia could hear. Actually, better than fine. We had quite an interesting flight. Interesting? People are sharing a video saying you were discriminated against, then the pilot turned out to be someone you knew. What happened? Alicia leaned closer to the phone. It's a long story, honey, but yes, there was an incident. And yes, the captain intervened, though we didn't know him personally. You did. I did. Confusion colored Jamal's voice. Captain Michael Harris, Terrence said, unable to keep the smile from his voice despite the serious circumstances. Apparently, you've been keeping some secrets from your old parents. There was a moment of stunned silence before Jamal responded. Captain Harris was your pilot? No way. That's incredible. Is he still there? Can I talk to him? He had another flight to prepare for, Alicia explained, but he'll be joining us for dinner tomorrow. He speaks very highly of you, by the way. Wait, Jamal said, his voice shifting from excitement to concern. Back up. What exactly happened on that flight? The video clips online don't show everything. Terrence and Alicia took turns explaining the entire situation, from the initial confrontation with Catherine to Captain Harris's recognition of their names to the eventual meeting with the airline executive. I'm so sorry you went through that, Jamal said when they finished, his voice tight with emotion. You shouldn't have had to deal with that kind of treatment, especially when you were just trying to get here for my graduation. Don't you worry about us, Terrence assured him. We've navigated worse. The important thing is we're here now, and we've got some special news to deliver in person. News? What news? Alicia laughed softly. Nice try, young man. You'll find out tomorrow. Now, we should get our luggage and head to the hotel. What time are you coming by in the morning? After finalizing plans with Jamal and ending the call, they continued toward baggage claim. As they walked, several travelers gave them curious glances, a few even doing double takes of recognition. I think we've been spotted, Terrence murmured as a young woman nudged her companion and pointed discreetly in their direction. Dr. and Mrs. Washington. They turned to find a middle-aged black woman approaching them tentatively. Yes. Alicia responded. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said, but I saw what happened on your flight. The video is everywhere. I just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground with such dignity. My daughter is a flight attendant for another airline, and she texted me the video saying it's already being discussed in their employee forums. This brief interaction was the first of several. By the time they reached baggage claim, at least a dozen people had approached them with similar sentiments, expressions of solidarity, gratitude for their composure, and in some cases, shared stories of similar experiences. A young white man in his 20s even asked if he could shake their hands. My professor showed your video in our ethics in business class an hour ago, he explained. It's already being used as a teaching moment. The realization that their private ordeal had so quickly become a public touchpoint for discussions about race and corporate responsibility was both overwhelming and humbling. "I never wanted to be the face of anything," Terrence confessed quietly as they waited for their luggage to appear on the carousel. "I just wanted to sit next to my wife on a plane." "I know," Alicia replied, squeezing his hand. "But sometimes our personal struggles become part of something larger. If our experience helps even one person be treated with more dignity, or helps one company improve their practices, isn't that worth something?" Their hotel shuttle arrived just as they collected their bags. The driver, an older black man named Walter who had been with the Marriott for 30 years, recognized them immediately. "You're the couple from that Delta flight," he said as he loaded their luggage. "My grandson showed me the video right before my shift. You two handled yourselves with real class." During the drive to the hotel, Walter shared his own experiences with discrimination throughout his decades in the service industry. "Things have changed," he acknowledged, "but not as much as some folks like to think. That's why what you did matters. You showed there's still dignity in standing up for yourself." At the hotel, they were surprised to find they had been upgraded to a suite. "Compliments of the manager," the receptionist explained with a smile. "She said to tell you that your story resonated with her personally." Once settled in their room, Alicia checked her email to find dozens of messages, from colleagues, former clients, and even strangers who had somehow found her law firm contact information. There were interview requests from news outlets, speaking invitations from civil rights organizations, and a particularly touching note from a group of black medical students who had been inspired by Terrence's calm resilience. "This is overwhelming," she said, showing Terrence her screen. "What do we do with all this attention?" Before he could answer, there was a knock at their door. A hotel staff member stood outside with a large gift basket. "This was just delivered for you," he explained, handing Terrence the accompanying card. The message inside read, "With gratitude for your grace under pressure and for paving the way for future generations. Your story will be shared in our crew training starting next week. Elliot Davidson, Delta Airlines." Included in the basket was a framed copy of a press release announcing the establishment of the Washington Harris Scholarship for underrepresented students in aviation, with an initial endowment of $250,000. "They actually did it," Terrence said, genuinely moved. "And they named it after us and Captain Harris. This is what real accountability looks like," Alicia observed. "Not just apologizing, but creating concrete change." They spent the evening responding to messages and preparing for Jamal's graduation the next day. Though physically exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of their journey, they felt a sense of purpose that transcended their personal experience. As they finally settled into bed, Terrence reflected, "You know, when I was a resident, an older black surgeon once told me that our successes were never just our own, that each achievement created possibility for those who came after us." He was right, Alicia murmured sleepily. "Just like each stand against injustice matters, even when it seems small. Even when it's just insisting on sitting next to your wife on a plane," Terrence added. "Especially then," Alicia replied, curling closer to him. "Because dignity isn't a small thing. It's everything." Outside their window, the Atlanta skyline glittered with promise, a fitting backdrop for the graduation ceremony that awaited them. A celebration not just of Jamal's achievements, but of the legacy of resilience that had made his opportunities possible. Morning sunlight streamed through the hotel room curtains, heralding the day they had traveled so far to celebrate. Terrence awoke first, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before remembering they were in Atlanta for Jamal's graduation. The events of the previous day came flooding back, the discrimination, the unexpected ally in Captain Harris, the viral video, and the airline's response. "Alicia," he said softly, gently rousing his wife. "It's graduation day." She stirred, opening her eyes with a smile that quickly grew as realization dawned. "Our boy becomes a college graduate today." They moved through their morning routine with practiced efficiency, the excitement of the day's significance energizing them despite the emotional exhaustion of their journey. As Terrence adjusted his tie in the mirror, Alicia came up behind him, resting her chin on his shoulder. "Remember when he was 5, she reminisced, and he told us he wanted to fly to the moon?" Terrence chuckled. "And we bought him that little astronaut costume for Halloween. Now he's about to be a real pilot," Alicia marveled. "Not quite the moon, but the sky at least." A knock at the door announced Jamal's arrival. When they opened it, their son stood before them in his graduation regalia, the blue and white colors of Howard University setting off his broad smile. "Mom! Dad!" he exclaimed, embracing them both at once. At 22, Jamal Washington had grown into a young man who carried himself with quiet confidence. He had Terrence's height and build, combined with Alicia's expressive eyes and determined jawline. "Look at you," Alicia said, stepping back to take in the sight of her son in his cap and gown. "Every sacrifice, every long night, every battle, all worth it for this moment." "About yesterday," Jamal began, his expression growing serious. "I watched the full video. I can't believe they treated you that way." "Today isn't about that," Terrence assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Today is about celebrating you and everything you've accomplished. Besides," Alicia added with a mischievous smile, "we have something for you that might take your mind off it." She retrieved the envelope from her purse, the one Mr. Davidson had given them containing Jamal's acceptance to the airline's pilot development program. "This was supposed to arrive next week, but we have special delivery privileges." Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. His eyes widened as he scanned the contents, understanding dawning on his face. "I got in," he whispered, looking up at his parents in disbelief. "I actually got in." "Not only did you get in," Terrence confirmed proudly, "but according to Captain Harris, you were their top candidate." Joy overtook Jamal's features as the significance sank in. This wasn't just acceptance into a program, it was validation of his dream, recognition of his talent and determination, and a clear path to the career he had worked toward for years. "Captain Harris told you that?" he asked, still processing. "On the flight. He had quite a lot to say about you," Alicia smiled. "All of it impressive. He'll tell you himself at dinner tonight." Jamal shook his head in amazement. "I still can't believe he was your pilot. What are the chances?" "The universe works in mysterious ways," Terrence replied. "Now, let's get to that ceremony. I hear the valedictorian gives a pretty important speech." Jamal grinned, the weight of his achievement evident in his bearing. "I rewrote parts of it last night, after seeing what happened to you. If that's okay." Alicia squeezed his arm gently. "More than okay. Your voice matters, Jamal. Today and always." The Howard University campus buzzed with the electric energy that only graduation day can generate. Families gathered in their finest attire, pride radiating from their faces as they located seats in the outdoor ceremony space. Photographers captured graduating seniors in their regalia, preserving the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. As valedictorian, Jamal would be seated on the stage with university officials and the commencement speaker, a renowned civil rights attorney who had graduated from Howard 30 years prior. Terrence and Alicia bid him a temporary farewell at the gathering area for graduates, each embracing him with the mixture of pride and bittersweetness that marks such transitions. "We'll be right there in the third row," Alicia assured him, straightening his cap one last time in a gesture that bridged his childhood and adulthood. "Just like always," Jamal replied softly. "Front and center for everything I've ever done." "We wouldn't have it any other way," Terrence said, his voice thick with emotion. As they found their seats, Terrence noticed several people glancing their way with recognition. Word of their experience had spread far beyond what they had anticipated. A woman in the row behind them leaned forward. "Excuse me," she said tentatively, "aren't you the couple from that flight? The video?" Alicia nodded politely. "Yes, that was us. My daughter's graduating today too," the woman continued. "Pre-law. She showed me that video and said, "That's why I want to be an attorney, Mom. To fight for people like them. You've already made a difference." Before they could respond, the processional music began, signaling the start of the ceremony. The faculty entered first in their academic regalia, followed by university officials and honored guests. Finally, the graduating class appeared, a sea of blue gowns moving in organized lines toward their future. The ceremony proceeded with the familiar rhythm of such occasions: welcome addresses, recognition of distinguished faculty, conferral of honorary degrees. Throughout it all, Terrence and Alicia's eyes remained fixed on their son seated on the stage, his posture reflecting the dignity and purpose they had instilled in him. When the time came for the valedictorian address, the university president approached the microphone. "It is now my pleasure to introduce this year's valedictorian, a young man whose academic excellence is matched only by his character and vision for the future. Please welcome Jamal Washington." Applause thundered through the assembly as Jamal rose and moved to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Distinguished faculty, honored guests, fellow graduates, family, and friends. Today marks not an ending, but a beginning, not just of our professional journeys, but of our responsibility to create the world we wish to inhabit." His voice, strong and clear, carried across the gathering with conviction born of preparation and passion. He spoke of the Howard legacy, the shoulders of giants upon which they stood, the obligation to excellence that came with their education. Then, his tone shifted slightly as he moved into the portion he had rewritten the night before. "Yesterday, as my parents traveled here to witness this moment, they experienced something that reminded me why our work, all of our work, regardless of field, remains unfinished. They were told they couldn't sit together on their flight because of a supposed airline policy that somehow only applied to them as a black couple." A murmur rippled through the audience as many recognized the reference to the viral video. "What happened next, however, is what I want to focus on today," Jamal continued. "My mentor, a black airline captain who had faced his own battles for respect and opportunity, recognized their names and intervened. The airline's leadership took immediate accountability and created a scholarship program for underrepresented students in aviation. Fellow passengers spoke up as allies rather than remaining silent observers." He paused, his gaze finding his parents in the audience. "That is the world we must all help build, one where injustice is met not just with outrage, but with action, where those who have broken barriers reach back to guide others through. Where accountability isn't exceptional but expected. My parents taught me that dignity isn't negotiable, and that standing up for it, with grace, persistence, and strategic wisdom, creates ripples that extend far beyond our individual experiences." Terrence felt Alicia's hand tighten around his as their son's words washed over them. They had always been proud of Jamal, but in this moment, witnessing him transform their painful experience into inspiration for his peers, their pride transcended words. "As we leave Howard today," Jamal concluded, "we carry with us not just degrees, but responsibility, to excel not for personal gain alone, but for the advancement of all, to recognize injustice and confront it, to create opportunity where barriers have stood." In the words of Toni Morrison, "If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else." That is our charge today and always. The applause was immediate and thunderous, graduates and families rising to their feet in appreciation of words that had touched something essential in their shared experience. Terrence and Alicia stood with them, tears streaming unashamedly down their faces. The remainder of the ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. The conferral of degrees, the moving of tassels, the jubilant recessional. Afterward, amid the chaos of families finding graduates and photographers capturing moments, they finally reconnected with Jamal. "Your speech," Alicia began, words failing her as she embraced her son. "You made us incredibly proud," Terrence finished for her, his own voice unsteady. "I meant every word," Jamal replied simply. As they made their way through the crowd toward the reception area, a familiar figure appeared, navigating through the sea of blue gowns with purpose. "Captain Harris!" Jamal exclaimed, spotting his mentor. "I wouldn't have missed it," Captain Harris replied, embracing Jamal warmly before turning to shake hands with Terrence and Alicia. "That was quite a speech, young man. It seems we have you to thank for more than just intervention on our flight," Alicia said. "Jamal has flourished under your guidance." "The potential was always there," Captain Harris replied modestly. "I just helped clear a few obstacles from his path." A commotion nearby drew their attention. A man in an expensive suit was approaching, flanked by university officials. "Mr. Davidson," Terrence recognized the airline executive from the previous day. "Dr. and Mrs. Washington," Davidson greeted them formally. "And this must be the valedictorian I've heard so much about." "Congratulations, Jamal." Jamal shook his hand, somewhat bewildered by the executive's presence at his graduation. "Thank you, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity your airline is providing." "The gratitude is mutual," Davidson assured him. "Talent like yours is exactly what our industry needs." He turned to address all three Washingtons. "I hope you don't mind my intrusion on your family celebration, but I wanted to inform you personally that the board has approved the scholarship program we discussed. The first recipients will be selected this fall." "That's wonderful news," Alicia responded sincerely. "There's more," Davidson continued. "Catherine Reynolds has been terminated from her position, effective immediately. And we've implemented a company-wide review of our training procedures, with a specific focus on recognizing and addressing implicit bias." Captain Harris nodded approvingly. "Accountability matters. Change requires more than words." "Indeed it does," Davidson agreed. "Which is why I'd like to formally invite all three of you, along with Captain Harris, to serve on our newly formed Advisory Council for Inclusion and Equity. Your perspectives would be invaluable as we work to ensure nothing like what happened yesterday occurs again." The invitation represented something significant, not just acknowledgement of harm done, but recognition of expertise and lived experience as essential components of institutional change. After Davidson departed, promising to send formal details about the Advisory Council, the Washingtons and Captain Harris made their way to a quieter area of campus. Under a sprawling oak tree, Jamal finally opened his graduation gift, his grandfather's antique pocket watch, now engraved with his initials and graduation date. "This has been passed down through 4 generations of Washington men," Terrence explained as Jamal examined the timepiece with reverence. "It's traveled from sharecropping fields in Mississippi to medical conferences around the world," Alicia added. "And now it will accompany a pilot across the skies." Captain Harris smiled at the symbolism. "From bound to earth to touching the heavens. That's quite a journey for one family." "For all of us," Jamal said thoughtfully. "Each generation climbing higher because of the one before." As afternoon transitioned to evening, they gathered for dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The conversation flowed easily between reflections on the past and visions for the future. Jamal's upcoming pilot training, Captain Harris's mentorship program expansion, Terrence's research, Alicia's cases. "I have news of my own," Captain Harris revealed as dessert was served. "The airline has approved my proposal for a formal mentorship initiative targeting students from underrepresented groups interested in aviation careers. We're calling it the Wingspan Program." "That's fantastic," Jamal responded enthusiastically. "How many students will you be able to mentor?" "We're starting with 20 nationwide," Captain Harris explained, "with plans to expand to 50 by the 3rd year. And I'd like you to consider joining as a junior mentor once you've completed your initial training." "Me?" Jamal looked surprised. "But I'll barely have my wings." "Sometimes the most effective mentors are those just a few steps ahead on the path," Captain Harris replied. "You'll remember the challenges more vividly than those of us decades into our careers." As the evening drew to a close, they stood together on the restaurant's terrace, the city lights below mirroring the stars above. It was a fitting visual metaphor for the day's blend of earthly achievement and higher aspiration. "I've been thinking," Terrence said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about what was said in Jamal's speech today. About dignity being non-negotiable. What about it? Alicia asked. Throughout my career, I've encountered so many situations where I was expected to choose between my dignity and my goals, to overlook slights and microaggressions for the sake of advancement. I've made those compromises, believing they were necessary sacrifices. Captain Harris nodded in recognition. We all have, in our generation. It was the price of entry. But yesterday, Terrence continued, when I refused to be separated from you, he looked at Alicia. It wasn't a calculated decision. It was instinctive. And somehow, that moment of refusing to compromise led to all of this. He gestured to encompass not just their immediate gathering, but the larger cascade of positive changes stemming from their stand. Perhaps that's the lesson, Jamal suggested thoughtfully. That dignity and progress aren't opposing forces. That sometimes standing firm creates more possibility than bending. Wisdom from the next generation, Captain Harris smiled, raising his glass. To dignity without compromise, and to Jamal Washington, Howard University's distinguished graduate and future captain of the skies. They clinked glasses as the Atlanta night embraced them, for individuals whose paths had converged through both injustice and grace to create something meaningful together. 1 year later, Terrence and Alicia Washington found themselves once again at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. This time, however, they weren't passengers but honored guests, assembled with a small crowd on the observation deck overlooking the runways. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Mr. Davidson, now promoted to Chief Operations Officer following the success of his diversity initiatives, Delta Airlines is proud to present Flight 3482 from Atlanta to Chicago, a milestone in our commitment to fostering diversity in aviation. On the tarmac below, a gleaming aircraft waited, its significance evident in the ceremonial water arch prepared by airport fire trucks. The aircraft's door was open, the jet bridge extended. Today's flight is historic for several reasons, Davidson continued. It marks the successful completion of our first Wingspan program cohort, the 1-year anniversary of our Washington Harris Scholarship, and most significantly, the inaugural commercial flight for First Officer Jamal Washington, who graduated at the top of his class. Applause erupted from the assembled group, which included airline executives, aviation industry representatives, and the first recipients of the scholarship program that had emerged from the Washington's experience. Terrence squeezed Alicia's hand as they watched their son emerge onto the jet bridge in his pilot's uniform, standing alongside Captain Michael Harris. The two men waved to the observation deck before turning to board the aircraft they would fly together. From being told we couldn't sit together, Alicia murmured, to watching our son fly with his mentor. Life takes unexpected turns. The best kind of justice, Terrence replied. Not just addressing what went wrong, but creating new possibilities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. As they watched the aircraft taxi toward the runway, Alicia reflected on how a single incident, painful as it was, had catalyzed meaningful change not just for their family, but for an institution and, potentially, an industry. The scholarship program had already supported 15 students pursuing aviation careers. The airline's new training protocols had been adopted by 2 other major carriers. Catherine's termination had sent a clear message about accountability. The plane accelerated down the runway, gathering speed until it lifted gracefully into the sky, banking slightly before setting course for Chicago, completing a circle that had begun with discrimination but was transforming into opportunity. On board, Jamal Washington sat in the right seat of the cockpit, focused intently on his responsibilities as first officer. Beside him, Captain Harris guided the aircraft with the confidence of decades of experience, occasionally offering quiet instruction to his protégé. "Your parents are proud of you," he said as they reached cruising altitude. "And rightly so." "I'm proud of them," Jamal replied. "For standing up that day. For showing me what dignity looks like in action." Below them, the patchwork landscape of America stretched out in all its complexity. A nation still wrestling with its contradictions and unfulfilled promises, but also capable of moments of progress and redemption. The aircraft continued northward, carrying not just passengers, but a story of resistance transformed into opportunity, of individual dignity insisting on institutional change. In first class, 2 empty seats had been reserved in honor of Terrence and Alicia Washington. A small symbolic acknowledgement that some journeys matter far beyond the physical distance they cover. This powerful story reminds us that dignity is non-negotiable, even in moments of humiliation. The Washingtons' experience reveals how systemic racism operates in everyday spaces, appearing as policies that somehow only apply to people of color. Yet it also demonstrates that standing firm against discrimination can create ripples of positive change beyond what we might imagine. Captain Harris represents the importance of mentorship and reaching back to help others navigate barriers. When those who break ceilings extend a hand to the next generation, progress accelerates. Meanwhile, Carlos shows us that allyship from within flawed systems is crucial, speaking truth to power despite personal risk. Perhaps most importantly, the story illustrates that accountability must go beyond apologies to create structural change. The airline's response. Terminating Catherine, establishing scholarships, revising training protocols, demonstrates how institutions can transform moments of failure into opportunities for meaningful evolution. The Washington family's journey reminds us that justice isn't just about addressing what went wrong, but about creating new possibilities that wouldn't have existed otherwise. By refusing to compromise their dignity for convenience, they catalyzed changes that will benefit countless others. Proving that sometimes, standing firm creates more possibility than bending. What moments in your life have required you to choose between dignity and convenience? Have you witnessed discrimination that made your blood boil? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of courage in the face of injustice. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for yourself can create positive change beyond what you might imagine. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May we all find the courage to insist on respect, even in the most uncomfortable moments.